And I believe that we are ready to get started. Welcome to the kickoff of the Virtual Infant and Toddler and School Age Child Care Institute. My name is Melanie Brizzi, and I'm the project director of the Child Care State Capacity Building Center, which houses the Infant Toddler Specialist Network. We know that many of you have joined us in our in-person event in previous years, and we are very pleased and excited to kick off this new virtual format for the Infant Toddler School Age Child Care Institute. Today I'm very happy that Katari Coleman, the project director of the National Center for After School Enrichment, is joining me as a co-facilitator of today's session. Let's take a second and find out who all of you are that are joining us. So we're going to start a poll and ask you to take a look at it. There we go. You can now see it on your screen. If you could please respond as to what the most appropriate category for your role is, we would appreciate it. And as you are completing this poll, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the schedule of events for our entire virtual ITSAC. Following today's kickoff webinar, we're going to be hosting a series of 3 topical webinars with guest speakers and interactive discussions. And these next 3 sessions will be held once a month in November, December, and January. The first webinar in November, it will be on the 13th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic will be Family Child Care, Supporting Quality. Our second webinar is December 11th, also from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic of that session will be Quality Improvement Systems that Support Children Across the Age Continuum. Our third and final session of the virtual ITSAC will be held in January on the 8th, same time, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and will focus on trauma and resilience, the role of child care providers. Following each of these webinars, there will be an age-specific breakout discussion session to dig deeper into the content shared during each session. For more information about the ITSAC sessions, you can click on the link that is at the bottom of your screen. It says Institute homepage, and that will give you more information. Today's presentation will be sent to participants and will be posted on the same website next week. So it looks like we have quite a bit of response from our poll. Thank you for that. It looks like about 26% of us on the call are state agency staff, and another about the same amount are from Child Care Resource and Referral. Thanks again for everyone who took that poll. We appreciate and helpful knowing who all has joined us today. So let's talk a little bit about what today's session is going to look like. We're going to go, here's our agenda on your screen. You can see we're going to start with a welcome. In just a second, we're going to hear from the Director of the Office of Child Care and then from Dr. Ray. While Dr. Ray is presenting today, you do have the opportunity to ask questions, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout today's session. You'll do so by using the Q&A pod that's just to the right of the slide deck that you're seeing. And you can type in your questions there, and then Dr. Ray will be responding to those questions throughout the session. We have muted participants' lines, so please keep your lines muted and allow for everyone to hear better. Appreciate that. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the Director of the Office of Child Care and to offer our thanks to the Office of Child Care for making the virtual ITSAC available to us. Shannon Christian is the Director of the Office of Child Care, and I now welcome Shannon, and she'll have a few words to say to us.
Thank you, Melanie. As you can probably guess, I'm happy to be here and happy to welcome you to the kickoff of the Office of Child Care's virtual Infant Toddler School Age Child Care Institute. It's a little bit weird to be on the phone because I keep picturing the big ballrooms where we usually do this and feeling a little sad that I can't see your faces, but at least we're together. Our theme this time is Bridging the Child Care Continuum Through Policy and Practice. And this institute is designed to build the capacity of professionals working to manage and support child care systems, particularly those focused on infant, toddler, or school-age policies and practices implemented under the Child Care and Development Fund, the CCDF program. The Office of Child Care administers that program, which is a block grant, $8.2 billion block grant, having gotten a 38% increase to states in fiscal year 18, which we've maintained so far since. And that block grant goes to states, territories, and tribal governments that provide support for children and their families with paying for child care that will fit their needs and that will prepare their children to succeed in school. The CCDF provides access to child care services for eligible low-income families so parents can work, attend school, or enroll in training. CCDF also improves the quality of care to promote children's healthy development and learning by supporting child care licensing, quality improvement systems to help programs meet higher standards, and training and education for child care workers. We establish and oversee the implementation of child care policies and provide guidance and technical assistance to states, territories, and tribes as they administer these block grant CCDF programs. Here at the Office of Child Care, we understand the importance of focusing attention and resources on families with children across the age continuum from birth through 12 in their approaches to both policy and practice, and this institute is designed to help support this focus. There are very different developmental periods and needs represented across this continuum, including infants and toddlers and school age. And this institute pays particular attention to those developmental periods, which each have their own special challenges in finding care. So it's not just about the developmental periods, but about what do we do to make sure that care is available to families to meet their needs. So in fiscal year 2016, CCDF served an average of 823,000 low-income working families each month and nearly 1.4 million children under the age of 13. 28% of those children were infants and toddlers, and our largest group, the 45%, were school age. As with previous years' in-person institutes, I know that we have a diverse audience with us today, including state, territory, and tribal agency staff, state after-school network leads, and infant-toddler specialist network leads, allowing for a consideration of topics affecting these age groups through various lenses. We hope to benefit from many perspectives again this year through today's interactive session and throughout the 4-month event. In addition to attending today's opening session, I hope you will also attend the 3 topical webinars and the follow-up age-specific conversations that will follow this kickoff plenary in the coming months, as Melanie just mentioned. Given our focus on access and quality, I am now delighted to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Aisha Ray, who will talk with us about quality, an equity lens across the continuum. And just a bit of background about Dr. Ray. She is a distinguished fellow at the BUILD initiative, where she co-leads the Equity Leaders Action Network, a national leadership program. Her BUILD work focuses on racial equity, teaching and learning, and professional development. In addition, Aisha is part of the BUILD team working with our National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance. Aisha is also a professor emerita of child development at the Erickson Institute. She's a developmental psychologist, having earned both her master's and her PhD in that important topic area. And her interests are in how cultural, social, and racial factors shape early childhood teacher preparation in the workforce, child rearing in low-income Black communities and the role of fathers, and racial equity and the elimination of white supremacy in early childhood systems. She's the former Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of Faculty at Erickson, and finally she serves as Senior Advisor to the President of the National Black Child Development Institute. You can read her full bio in the packaged materials that you've been given access to, but I will at this point turn it over to Aisha. Thanks for being here, Dr. Ray.
Shannon, and thanks for that generous introduction. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you and to talk about this very important topic. And I look forward to the discussion section at the end and welcome any and all comments people may have about what I have said, but also reflecting the questions that you feel are most important for us to consider. I'm trying to advance my slide and it's not going. Sorry, everyone. There we go. Thank you. So we have 4 goals today: to understand that high quality equity and cultural and linguistic competence are interdependent elements of effective systems for states, territories, and tribal governments as well, for the development of all policies, programs, and practice that engages children from birth through 12. Secondly, we want to understand that equity and equity processes may contribute to improving outcomes for children, birth through 12, and their families. Third, to try to understand that cultural competence is an equity strategy necessary in all aspects of early childhood systems, including workforce, policies, programs, administration, leadership, hiring, etc. And finally, we want to consider how to begin or continue to advance equity in the work you do for your state, your tribe, your territory, or the agencies and programs that you work with. We want to be sure to build high-quality, culturally responsive programs for children from birth through age 12 and their families as we go forward. I'm going to suggest that we consider some agreements for today's webinar. I hope that you come as a learner, not as an expert, that you look for what challenges your thinking, not what confirms that you are right, that you express what you believe to be your truth, expect and accept non-disclosure necessarily from others. You trust in others' contributions, and you respect others' ways of knowing and understanding the issues we will discuss. Throughout this conversation, we're going to have some polls that we're going to present, and I want to make sure that when we get to the first one that I explain it clearly to you, because there actually are 2 questions on it for different groups of you. But let me begin with this quote from John Powell. He makes a very important point. Treating people who are situated differently as if they were the same risks imposing on those individuals even greater inequities. And I want you to think about this throughout this conversation, because where people are situated has very much to do with inequities. People who are situated in poverty, in high-risk communities, in dangerous environments, are at a greater disadvantage for optimal developmental outcomes than our young children who are situated in communities that are rich with resources and with families who have the time and often energy and are under considerably less stress and can devote greater attention to their children. So as we go forward, think about this concept of situatedness and where people are at who you are serving currently. I'm going to go back a second because I have a feeling we have missed, there it is. I think we jumped the poll. So let's go back to this. I want you to think about these 2 questions and answer the questions in terms of the age group in which you do most of your work. The question is, what is the most significant equity gap your state, territory, or tribe faces in serving children from either birth to age 3, so if you work primarily in birth to age 3, please answer that poll question, or in serving school-age children 5 to under 13. So if you work with that age group, please answer that. We'll take a look in a moment to your responses.
And Dr. Ray, I apologize, but we're having some participants say that they're having a hard time hearing you, and I was just wondering if you could try to speak a little bit louder.
I can. That's interesting. I guess we can ask, is this clear? Are people hearing me better? I'm using a microphone, but that may not be helping. So please let me know if you can't hear.
People are responding that that they can hear you better now. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So if that happens again, just let me know.
Thank you.
Okay, the poll, I think we're going to get ready to close the poll. And for the top poll, for those of you who are working with children birth through, sorry, I'm having trouble moving this thing. Let's see. Okay. So really the biggest categories of response are other, and we're not able to, oh, I'm sorry, no, that's 0.79. Apologies. So the biggest categories of response for 0 to 3 are 30% availability of services, affordability at 32, which is even greater than that, 22% access to services, and then 11% culturally competent workforce, 1.5% linguistically competent workforce, and then others is 0.7, almost 0.8. Very interesting. Thank you. Let's see if people working with children 5 to 13 are having similar, somewhat different. Availability of services at 37%. Looks like culturally competent workforce at 20%. Access to services at 18%. 16.8, almost 17% for affordability of services. Others almost at 5, and then linguistically competent workforce at 2.41. So there are similarities in terms of access, availability, and affordability of services, and also in terms of culturally competent workforce. And linguistically is a far less significant gap for those on the call, on the webinar. Thank you so much. We'll go back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to move forward here. Goodness. All right. Ask John Powell. Back to, okay, sorry. Okay. So when looking at this image, I want to make the point that what we're seeking for children and families that we serve and the communities we serve, really communities that thrive and children that thrive. Not just survive, but really thrive. And we need, those children and those families need a particular set of supports. They need to have their basic needs met in terms of quality of housing, food, clothing, transportation, employment that allows for a family-sustaining income. We need to make sure that those families and children have physical and behavioral health and access to high-quality programs that provide those supports. Children need to be ready for school, and schools need to be, of course, ready for children, including early childhood programs and after-school programs. And that readiness of programs really involves this issue of cultural competence, which we're going to talk about a little further on. And finally, children need neighborhoods and communities that really provide safety and support for them and their families. We want these things and probably more, but I think we would all agree that for many of our children, they receive these supports, and for other children, they do not. And that inequality is a significant challenge for our society. So sorry. There we go. These three elements are essential elements in state, territory, and tribal systems. and in programs to support those individuals and groups furthest from opportunity. Equity, quality, and cultural competence are three interlocking issues. Cultural competence and equity are critical for high-quality, effective state, territorial, and tribal systems and programs that reduce disparities and advance child and family well-being. All state systems and tribal systems and territorial systems need to be culturally competent. The systems have to have leadership that is culturally competent, programs and policies that support cultural competence, and finally, all of these entities need to be linked and focused on equity. That is, assuring that those individuals who are most vulnerable for poor developmental outcomes, those families that need the greatest support, receive it. Okay. There's a certain couple of assumptions that I want to share with you. One is that federal policies and programs targeted at inequality are equity initiatives. And I often stress this because very often when one talks about equity, there are people who believe or who feel that perhaps this is just something that I believe or that people at BUILD believe, or perhaps the leadership of CCF believes. But in reality, the work that you all do, if you get federal money from these programs, if you work in any anti-poverty program, those programs really are targeted at equity. So I want to begin to go through a set of 8 assumptions, 8 points of information that I think are important for us understanding why quality, cultural competence, and equity matter in the development of systems and programs to improve child outcomes from birth through age 12. The first one, and I think many of you will be familiar with some of these issues, so I will not spend a great deal of time on them. But the first is, of course, the enduring association of poverty, race, and ethnicity with poor child outcomes. There is an abundance of research going back more than 70 years that shows the relationship between being poor and being a person of color, and that in that relationship often leads to poor child outcomes. It doesn't guarantee them. There are children who grew up in poverty and are Black and brown and Native American who are successful and succeed in life. But those children who are of color and grew up in poverty are more likely than their white peers to have disproportionately more challenges in growing up that place them at developmental and educational risk. Second point is that between birth and age 7, there is critical brain development. We know that between birth and 3, a significant amount of brain development occurs, but it doesn't just stop at 3. It goes on through the life course of children all the way into adolescence, and we need to pay close attention to this because brain development can be derailed by the environments that we provide children. And when we place children at risk in dangerous environments or with families that have so many stressors, they're very difficult for them to manage, we may in fact place those children at developmental and educational risk. Third point I want to make is that there is growing diversity in this country, which everyone on this call is probably deeply aware of. And the drivers of this diversity are children under 12. For the first time in the United States, it's been recorded that children under 15 are now, majority of those children are children of color. So they're Alaskan Native, American Indian, Asian American, Black, Pacific Islanders, Latino children, and from other non-white groups. 49.9% of children under the age of 15 are white children, and Latinx children are 25% of children under age 15. So of that group of children of color, the largest number of those children, the largest percentage of those children are Latinx children. Language diversity is always also growing in this society, and it is also being driven by young children. There are now 25% of all young children in the U.S. are children for whom English is a language they are learning, along with learning one or two other languages. The fifth point is that there is a persistence of the achievement gap that causes great concern and directs us towards issues related to equity and quality and cultural responsivity. This data that you see before you on 4th and 8th grade reading scores from 2015 show that Asian American children are doing the best in terms of their proficiency in reading by 4th grade and by 8th grade, and that children of color, particularly Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, American Indian and Alaskan Native children, Latinx children, and Black children are not doing as well at all. The sixth point is that high-quality early childhood education programs have lifelong benefits for children. We know that this from 3 seminal studies, the Perry Preschool Study, Abecedarian, and the Chicago Child Parent Centers. All of these studies have very robust data that shows that if children attend high-quality programs, they are more likely to have positive outcomes both in their development in school-age children, but also well into adulthood. And in fact, the benefits of their parents attending preschool programs affects the children of those individuals who went to Perry Preschool, Abecedarian, and Chicago Child Parent Center. So early childhood investment is a powerful investment, as long as it is of high quality. High-quality after-school programs also benefit children. There's a decade of research and evaluation studies that confirm this, and that quality and confirm the ingredients of quality programs, including the staff and their credentials and abilities, the program, the structure of the program, and the degree to which the program provides good supervision to children. Also, the access to program and sustained participation of children in programs, and the strong partnerships of programs with other places where children spend time. And finally, the importance of investment in children's development. What this chart shows is that prenatal programs, which are on your left, they are the tan bar on this chart, give the greatest return on investment. For every dollar you invest in prenatal programs, you get a greater return than every dollar you invest in job training programs after children leave school, which is the green area to your right. And the curve goes downward with each year, each age bracket of children. So 0 to 3 programs are the second, you get the second grade investment. 4 to 5-year-old programs, preschool programs, the third greatest investment, and so forth. So these programs are very important for our young children across the country. So in summary, we know that quality programs drive equity and reduce disparities, as the last couple of slides demonstrated, that structural oppression, especially inequality due to race and class, can negatively affect young children's performance in school, and that increasing the number of young children of color and in poverty and the association with opportunity achievement gaps is something we need to keep our eye on and try to address. So here's another poll question for all of you. How true is this statement? My state, territory, or tribe has a written equity plan designed to reduce ethnic, racial, and social class disparities for children ages infant to school age. How true is that? Somewhat true? Not true at all? Not sure? Great. Okay, I think we're getting the trend here. So not sure is winning the race. Somewhat true at 16%, a little over 16%. Not true at all for a little over 12% of you, and true for only 3.87. Very interesting. So thank you for taking that poll. Really appreciate it. What it says, to me at least, is that I think there's lots more work to be done across the country in trying to really make equity a more central part of the work that's done on behalf of young children. We know that disparities and inequalities in children's circumstances, birth through 12, exist in every state, territory, and tribe. There are issues of access, availability of programs, where, for example, where programs are even placed, how far families have to travel to get to a program may be a barrier. Affordability of programs may be a barrier that leads to disparities. Eligibility to receive programs. Whether or not programs are perceived by families as culturally responsive to them, and whether those programs are attractive to families because of that, or in fact appear to be a barrier. Programs often do not adequately serve all non-English speakers and families effectively. Another barrier can be access to a highly prepared workforce that is culturally and linguistically competent, and comprehensive wraparound services. The absence of those can be a significant barrier for families and contribute to disparities. To address these disparities, we might first consider a definition of equity. Equity really is a strategy that tends to drive resources towards children and families and communities who are lacking certain kinds of support in order to increase their success and to help them to thrive. It intentionally targets and dismantles systems that support inequality. Our definition at BUILD for equity is the following. Every family and child of color and in poverty has everything they need so that they develop optimally. Please note that the terms here are child of color and in poverty. I'm often asked, well, what about white children? White children in poverty are also included in this definition. So it's every child of color who is experiencing disparities and every child in poverty experiencing disparities. Resources, opportunities, rewards, and burdens are fairly distributed across groups and communities so that those with the greatest challenges are adequately supported and not further disadvantaged. And policies designed to support families and children, and they are fair and just. So equity involves resource redistribution, and it involves focusing on those individuals who are experiencing the most disparities, and it helps us really to think about the notion of how inequality is structured in our society. Structural inequality is a key idea in equity. It means that gender, race, ethnicity, and other social categories are used to divide people into groups. Resources, benefits, and opportunities like good schools and safe housing are not equally distributed among these groups. For instance, we know that men earn on average more than women. That is an indication of a set of benefits that men receive in the society that are not available to women. Doesn't mean all women, but again, on average, women are more disadvantaged in the society when it comes to income than are men. Inequality of opportunity and benefits creates and recreates inequalities through institutions and policies, and this is where we come in. When we were working in institutions like child care programs and after-school programs, or we're working in state or tribal government or in territorial government, looking at how to change inequalities, we need to look at how the opportunities and benefits are structured for the people we're serving and how to change that if we can. Inequalities affect all members of the society, and let me just give you a quick example of this. In 2013, the Kellogg Foundation did a report in which they estimated that bias costs the United States $1.9 trillion per year. And they make the case that if we were to eliminate bias, we would be a wealthier country and a more productive country. When we think about when we think about equity in terms of race, social class, and gender, I want to suggest to you that we think about it in 4 ways. This is one of the tools that we use in the Equity Leaders Action Network, which has been very effective in helping our fellows and others across the country to think about how inequities are structured. One issue is we have to think about our own personal behavior, and we have to look at our own biases, how we support or do not support equity, and the actions that we might take in terms of thinking about how we see others who are different from ourselves, and to improve those ideas we may have that act as barriers for us being effective with other people. Secondly, we need to look at the interpersonal relationships that we have and that we support in the work that we do. One typical factor in interpersonal relationships in a country like the United States, where race, gender, and social class are really baked into the equity and inequality systems, interpersonal animus is a challenge. That is, groups that have hostility to one another because they are, in fact, struggling for resources, increases the chances that inequity will continue, because inequity privileges some people and not others. And it's beneficial if you are a person who has economic privilege, for example, that groups that have less are fighting with one another and not fighting with you or trying to get you to change your behavior. The third level of change that is important to think about is the institutional. That is, we need to look at our own programs, our own systems, our own policies and practices, hiring practices, eligibility practices that we use with families, to begin to open up and change those things that may be disadvantaging those families that already are disadvantaged by economics, race, ethnicity, or language. And finally, we want to look at the structural level of inequity and how interlocking systems may themselves perpetuate inequity. When we think about, for example, state systems, just as one example of this, where we have child welfare, early learning, and those two systems are siloed and do not interact with one another, even though the same young children and families may be in both of these systems. That is a way in which structures perpetuate inequality. In addition, another key idea that I want you to think about is the notion of opportunity structures. And these are pathways to society's benefits. And I've put on this graphic a number of these: housing, transportation, education, health and mental health, nutrition, technology and communications, social capital networks, employment, income, wealth, and wealth accumulation. These pathways to society's benefits are not equal for all children and families. These opportunity structures are both racialized, and they also have a class aspect. If you are a poor child living on the south side of the city of Chicago in inadequate housing with poor public transportation opportunities, very poor schools, you don't have technology, you don't have internet access in your home, you don't have social capital networks available to you that allow you or your parents to get a good job from someone who has networks and can advance individuals by their recommendations and mentoring. If your parents have poor employment options, and there is almost no wealth accumulation or no wealth accumulation for your family, you are in a very different opportunity pathway than others, and who have very rich opportunity pathways in all of these areas. So thinking about these opportunity pathways, thinking about how segregation shapes these opportunity pathways, how inequality does, that all families are not situated in the same way within the society, and that increases the issues of inequity for them and for their children. The last key idea around equity that I want you to think about is the issue of data. Data is an absolutely critical driver of equity work. And to the extent, this quote from the Annie Casey Foundation makes the case that institutions and systems tend to report data for whole populations. But if we're going to do equity work, we actually have to have data that's broken down by the characteristic of the population we're interested in. So, for example, if we're looking at racial disparities, we need data broken down by disaggregated by race. If we're looking at language disparities and services to children who are bilingual or multilingual, we need to understand the numbers of those children and where they are. So disaggregated data is a critical piece of equity work. And here is a question for you, and again, another poll. This one is: my agency, department, or organization disaggregates child data by race and ethnicity to help us target our efforts more effectively at disparities. How true is this statement? True, somewhat true, not true at all, or you're not sure? Okay, we're getting close to closing this out, and the trend here is also quite clear. 41, almost 42% of you are, it is somewhat true of the agency, department, or organization that you work with. For 31%, almost 31% of you, you're not sure that this is true. Another 17%, this is not, 18%, 17, not true at all, and true for 10%. Again, I think this data, of course, this is not representative of the entire country, but it is representative of the people on this call. And I think what it shows us is that at only 10% of the agencies, departments, or organizations you work with has disaggregated data by race or ethnicity. Very important to think about this issue and how to, in fact, encourage and support your organization to, in fact, begin to gather that kind of data, because it will help you see where the disparities are. So thank you very much, and we're going to move on now to talk about the important role of ensuring equity, cultural competence, and quality in the programs that you work in and in the systems you work in. And so a critical part of equity, as I said earlier in this talk, is culturally responsive systems and programs for children birth to school age. And here's a way of thinking about this. It is the ability of your states or your territories or your tribal governments' child-serving systems and programs at all levels, administrative, the programmatic level, to successfully match the cultural and linguistic needs of children and families with diverse values, practices, and beliefs, and to deliver services that demonstrate they increase quality, improve desired outcomes, and advance equity. So here is another poll question. In my agency, department, or organization, most staff have received ongoing training and support on cultural competence and how to work effectively with children and families from diverse racial, ethnic, and cultural groups. This is question is asking about ongoing training as opposed to the one-off. So the trend emerging here looks like this cultural competence training, ongoing cultural competence training is true for about 23% of you, somewhat true for 35%, so that true and somewhat true lands us, close to 56%, but not true at all for about 36% or almost 37% of you, and not sure for 5.7%. Very interesting, and I think, again, this shows more the fact that there's ongoing training around this for 36% or 21% of you, and somewhat true for 36% makes me optimistic. That's great. So we're going to move on from here and go on to our next point. Thank you so much for doing these polls. You guys are great. So there are two challenges we have around cultural competence, as you have seen. One is that there's probably not enough work being done. But the goal here is to create equitable, high-quality care and education systems birth through age 12 with appropriate policies, programs, and accountability systems in place, and the capacity to support and sustain optimal developmental and educational outcomes for the workforce and children in poverty and culturally, racially, linguistically, and ability diverse children. It's a high bar, but that is what we are trying to get to. And secondly, we're trying to create a workforce at all levels that is able to provide equitable, high-quality, culturally and linguistically responsive, intellectually rigorous, and emotionally supportive care and education for children in poverty and culturally, racially, linguistically, and ability diverse children. Again, we are a long way from this, but that is the goal that many of us are trying to get to, and I believe you are too. To do this, we need to establish across the country a kind of level of practice that focuses on equity. And here are some of the equity tools that I and my colleagues have identified that we think tend to help states, departments, tribal communities, territories to get to a real equity focus within their work. A written position statement on equity, such as a racial equity statement related to achieving the goals you have for children, families, and communities. Leadership that visibly is committed to achieving equity, visibly meaning not just sending a memo, but actually actively doing this and monitoring its progress. Ongoing training of all staff in equity practices, accountability structures to ensure that equity work is advancing state goals, data disaggregated by race and ethnicity that guide the equity work, mandates that require cross-agency and department alignment to achieve equity benchmarks, and ongoing involvement of those communities most impacted by the inequities that you are trying to eliminate, and ongoing support of the workforce to gain cultural and linguistic competence. We know that the workforce has to be culturally and linguistically competent because of the changes we are seeing in the demographics of children, the significant number of children who speak a language or are learning two languages simultaneously or multiple languages. And we know that our current early childhood workforce, at least, does not speak sufficient. There's not enough people who speak the languages of the children in their programs. And my hunch is this is true of after-school programs as well. So we want culturally responsive teaching and care, and this means teaching to and through the strengths of a child's culture. Teachers are validating and affirming the child by using the child's cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles So that the learning experiences are effective and relevant to children, teachers are effectively partnering with families when they engage in culturally and linguistically competent work. Is the workforce prepared to deliver high quality, culturally and linguistically responsive care and education? Well, in the work that my colleagues and I at Erickson have done and that of others around the country, the answer is sadly not really. Regardless of experience, we have found, Barbara Bowman, myself, and my colleague Jean Robbins have found that regardless of experience, early childhood teachers feel unprepared to educate culturally, linguistically, and racially and ethnically diverse kids. We also have found that early childhood teachers report that they learn to work effectively with diverse children through working directly with kids and not because of any professional preparation. And finally, 1/3 of U.S. bachelor's degree early childhood, college, and university programs do not sufficiently address diversity in their coursework, and only 7% require student teachers to do practice teaching in diverse settings. We found these to be very troubling data, as have others who've read these studies, not just ours, but that of others as well. So there is a disconnect between what we want for children birth to under 12 and what the workforce may be able to deliver at this point. One of the barriers to building an effective workforce is the issue of wages. It's hard to ask people to do a million wonderful things for children if, in fact, we are not willing to support them with a living wage. The workforce pays a wage penalty for working with children birth to 3. This is from some wonderful work that the Leah Austin and Marcy Whitebook have done. They found that at every level of education, infant and toddler teachers earn less than their peers who teach preschool children. 86% of center-based infant and toddler teachers earn less than $15 an hour, and more than 1/2 earn less than $10.10 an hour. And those infant and toddler teachers with no college earn $1.05 less per hour than preschool teachers with no college degrees. And black women who work with children 0 to 3 on average earn less than their white peers with similar jobs and educational preparation. So there is a wage penalty that you pay if you work with children 0 to 3, but if you are a woman of color, you pay an additional wage penalty. It's hard to get people to do all of the things we want them to do to be effective teachers if we are not going to pay them. In addition, by increasing the workforce credentials, which I'm not opposed to, but I think we need to do it very carefully so that we don't lose the diversity in our programs. By increasing workforce credentials, we may be, in fact, disproportionately disadvantaging those very teachers who we want to maintain in the classrooms, those who are linguistically competent, culturally competent teachers. And but they may also be the most vulnerable economically. And so I think we need to think very carefully about how we do increase the demand for credentials and training, and at the same time make sure that we are supporting teachers who want to stay in the field and who in fact contribute greatly to the well-being of children. So how do we create those pathways for a successful career working with children birth through 12 for every teacher and caregiver, director, and family support worker, in fact, the entire workforce, including those who are racially, linguistically, and culturally diverse? Well, we have to look at the barriers, and this is an equity issue. We have to look at what keeps people from advancing. We know that for many people in the early childhood workforce who themselves are in poverty, very often like the families that they serve, the cost of education and the educational debt they may have acquired already contributes to this. There often is a lack of scholarships. The location of programs can be a barrier. Scarcity of high-quality teacher training programs targeted at teachers of color and second language speakers. Higher education curriculum, lack of faculty of color, lack of academic advising, and so on and so forth, including instruction in English and internet access. All of these things can contribute to barriers, can all be barriers and contribute to the inequality we see in terms of preparation. Finally, I'm going to ask you in summary to just think about equity, quality, and cultural competence in your work for children and families. And perhaps you might want to start by thinking about sort of 2 big levels of change. Remember, I spoke about 4 levels of change: individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. So here are 2 of these: individual change. I want to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone if you tend to get stuck there, to learn, read, and study about the families you're serving, to really understand the history of communities, the history of different groups, the problematic history of the United States in terms of its treatment of different ethnic and racial groups and what the impact of that is currently. I want you to try to stay open and not be defensive. Diversify your network. One of the things we found in the Equity Leaders Action Network is that state leaders who we were working with really had networks that looked just like them. So that can be a problem in developing the capacity to work across kind of ethnic and racial class barriers that we see as problematic in the systems we're working in. So we need to open up our networks. We need to take action. Equity is all about action. It is about trying to make a difference, trying to make changes. So I encourage you to think about how to take action. And from the polls we saw today, there are a number of areas. You can encourage your people with whom you work to begin to design an equity plan, to take equity seriously, to begin to create a working group. There are a number of ways to begin, so I encourage you to take action. And assume that your perceptions of injustice may need to be fine-tuned. This is one of the things we found is all of us have to work on how we perceive the injustice that exists in the society and the experiences of groups that to which we do not belong. And I encourage you to seek equity training and mentoring. And then in terms of institutional change, look at the policies and practices that you govern the work you do. What kind of impacts do they have? Talk to people who receive these policies and practices who are, sort of downstream from you. How do they feel about them? What would they change if they could? And this is the 3rd bullet, include those most affected by the policies. Use data, again, take action, develop a diverse staff, and use external experts. Finally, I want you to think about who's invited to the policy and planning tables that you sit at and who is missing. Very often the people who are missing are really in 2 groups. They are the families and they are the people who receive the policies. I'm sorry, who have to engage with the policies in the workforce. So to the extent that you can, please try to include those most effective, that is the families and representatives of the workforce in all the work you do to try to improve the outcomes for children and families. And if you're already doing that, good, I encourage you to do more. Here are some resources for you. There are also some embedded in the slides that I encourage you to look at. And thank you very much for your attention today. I look forward to your questions.
That was wonderful information. Thank you so much, Dr. Ray.
You are very welcome.
We have a few questions from participants, and as well as some resources that individuals listed in the chat. Hello, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Kashari. I hope others can.
Much better now. Thank you. Okay. Just double checking again. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So, once again, that was wonderful information. Thank you so much, Dr. A. We have a few questions from participants, as well as, interestingly, some resources that individuals listed in the chat, which hopefully we can pull from that information and possibly share. Dr. Ray, the first question is, in slides 21 and 22, you discussed studies that define high quality related to early childhood and after-school programs. The question was, how do these studies define high quality?
Okay, do you want me to go back to those slides so everyone can see them again, or?
Well, you don't have to necessarily go
okay.
back, but
okay.
you can share
so these are, yeah, these, slide 21 is the slide from James Heckman's work about the Perry Preschool Program, and I also mentioned they have a Cedarian project and the Chicago Child Parent Center project. And they had very specific criteria that were characterized those high-quality programs. One is the teacher-child ratio was small. Teachers were credentialed in child development and early ed. So they had high credentials, the kinds of credentials that we now consider important for children for teachers to have who work with young children. So it was teacher-child ratio, teacher credentialing, rich curriculum that was culturally responsive was another piece of this, and tied to school success. There were wraparound services was a fourth, and parent involvement and parent education. And I say both of those because both were involved. In other words, parents were involved and invited into the programs, but there was also direct parent education that was given to parents about a number of issues related to child rearing and supporting their children's educational success. In terms of the second, this question also asked about after-school programs, and the quality, the characteristics they found associated with quality I mentioned, but I will mention them again. One was the program's quality itself, defined in terms of the structure of the program, the credentials of staff, and the amount of supervision the program gave to children in after-school programs. Second item was the access to the program and sustained participation of participants. So the degree to which access was allowed children to enter the program, and then the degree to which the program used strategies to sustain children's participation in after-school programs. And then the third element was strong partnerships among the program and other places where students are learning, such as partnerships with schools, with their homes, their families, and other community institutions where children spend time. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Also, there was a question that referenced if you might know of any states, territories, or tribes that have equity plans.
Do I know any states that have equity plans? Yes. Oregon and Washington are probably, I would say, way ahead of the class on these issues. I am doing work currently, as are many of my BUILD colleagues, with various states trying to work on these issues. I work with the state of Illinois. Some of my colleagues work with Michigan and Minnesota and other states to try to advance equity and to develop equity plans. But if you look at Washington State's early childhood work, you will see their equity documents, and Oregon also has very good equity documents, principles that are established that the state must follow, state government must follow, departments must follow, coordination of an alignment across departments. They're quite quite ahead of most states in the country on those issues. I hope that was helpful too.
Thank you. Also, there was a comment regarding researchers Joyce and Showers that show practices change when people are coached. Do you know of any efforts to coach on equity?
I don't know who asked this, but do you mean that coaching in the way we think of it in terms of early learning, that someone who is a coach specifically goes in and works directly with classroom teachers or works with state leadership to coach people to be more effective around equity? I'm not sure what the target is. Is it classroom program level coaching, or is it state, tribal, and territorial leadership coaching? I don't know if whoever wrote that.
The question wasn't quite clear, but I'm assuming possibly at the classroom level and probably at the program level, perhaps.
Right. I don't know specifically of what one would call coaching around this. So I think there probably are entities that are doing this with some classroom or program work. I'm much more aware of what BUILD does, which is state-level coaching and support and mentoring, and there is a lot of that BUILD does. But I think what programs tend to do is, in my experience at least, is to hire people to come and do a training on equity. But that, like most one-off training, is not, I think, probably successful. I think it opens people's minds to the idea, and that's important. But I'm not sure that it actually has lasting benefit. But that's a great question.
And we have another question. From the perspective of a special education educator, is there any data that reveal how many of the culturally diverse students have been referred to special ed?
I'm looking at the perspective of special ed educators. Is there any data that reveal how many of the culturally diverse students have been referred to special education? If I understand the question correctly, yes, there's a lot of data that shows that children who are, and I'm going to interpret culturally diverse, meaning perhaps racially, linguistically, and culturally diverse. The data on special education shows that children who are of color are more likely to have special education assignment. And children who are second language speakers, particularly young children, are more likely to have special education assignment. And there is research that explores whether or not those judgments that were made send children to those special ed services is correct or is part of bias. I hope that answers the question.
I think so as well. I'm looking to see if we have any additional questions. We do have an announcement that was posted that Sharon Christian would like folks to know that today HHS ACF posted a request for information on improving access to affordable quality child care. There's a 60-day comment period, and we encourage those of you to go to the information, the request for information, and share your comments. And it is under the Federal Registry. If you go to www.federalregistry.gov, under documents, if there's a way we can get that actual web address out to everyone, we will. And I'm sure information will go out through another platform as well regarding that. So that is all the questions that we have. Thank you so much, Dr. Ray. You've provided some awesome information for us to think about on our equity quest. I'm going to move to closing remarks. And in addition to attending today's opening session, I want to encourage everyone on this webinar. I want to encourage you to attend the 3 topical webinars and the follow-up age-specific conversations that Melanie mentioned earlier. The Family Child Care Supporting Quality Improvement Systems that Support Children Across the Age Continuum, Trauma and Resilience, the Role of Child Care Providers. As we close, we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to answer these evaluation questions to support our continuous quality improvement. And I want you to remember that this presentation will be sent out to all participants. Please, if you can, provide us with answers to these evaluation questions. I'm very grateful for your feedback. And once again, thank you, Dr. Ray, and thank you, Shannon, Christian, for your time today, and thank you, the participants.
Can you hear me? It's Shannon. I have one more comment.
Okay, go ahead. I can hear you.
Oh, good. I thought you might have closed me off. Anyway, I just posted the link to the new request for information that ACF posted today. That it's a formal request for information on building the supply or access to high-quality, affordable childcare, and we are holding these 10 roundtables around the country, but that'll just be, 10 cities in 10 states. And we know that there are a lot of other people that might want to weigh in on this topic that might help us guide future policy and legislation and our thinking. So that is hot off the press, and I put the link in the chat section of this conference. That's all. Thank you. I just heard about all the ways to try to hear from everybody, and that's one more way. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.